Hi, you guys. The Lord has kept me in the book of Joshua for the past few weeks. And this word kind of goes along with the word that I posted titled Jordan Crossing. And I posted that on February 3rd. So if you haven't watched that video, you may want to go back and look at that one because this word is kind of a follow-up to that. But the Lord has been keeping me in the beginning of the book of Joshua and following the theme of Jordan, with this being the Jordan year 2023. Michael Jordan, the basketball player, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, wore the number 23. So the other day, the Lord had me thinking about that word, Jordan Crossing, and he had me to go back. So that word, I was speaking from Joshua chapter 3, and then he brought me back to a word that he gave me a few years ago, actually, that came from Joshua chapter 6, when they finally crossed into the city of Jericho and the walls came down and they were able to enter in and take over and possess the land. I'm sorry. So the other day, the Lord just brought it to my spirit to go back to chapter 4 and 5 to see what happened between crossing the Jordan and entering the city of Jericho. So this word is going to come from chapter 4 and 5 of the book, from the book of Joshua. Joshua chapter 4 verse 1. After the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from the people, one man from each tribe." Verse 3, and command them, take 12 stones from this place in the middle of the Jordan where the priests are standing. Carry them with you and set them down at the place where you spend the night. Verse 4, so Joshua summoned the 12 men he had selected from the Israelites, one man for each tribe, and said to them, go across to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you lift a stone onto his shoulder, one for each of the Israelite tribes. Verse 6, so that this will be a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean to you? Verse 7, you should tell them, the water of the Jordan was cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant. When it crossed the Jordan's water was cut off. Therefore, these stones will always be a memorial for the Israelites. Verse 8, the Israelites did as Joshua had commanded them. The 12 men took stones from the middle of the Jordan, one for each of the Israelite tribes, just as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried them to the camp and set them down there. So what the Lord spoke to me about verse 1 through 8 was that he said, you have been selected to carry the weight of a generation on your shoulders. The 12 men from each tribe that were selected by Joshua were instructed to pick up a stone and place it on their shoulders and to carry it into the camp. So the Lord is saying that who this word applies to, you have been selected to carry the weight. Stones are heavy. You've been selected to carry the weight of a generation on your shoulders. The Lord says you're carrying your family and everything connected to you across into the promise. Verse 9. Joshua also set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. The stones are still there today. What the Lord said about verse 9, he spoke to me, stepping stones. People will be able to look at the steps that you took to get to the promise, to step into the promise and see what it is that you went through. They will be able to see the path that you took. And for some people, they're going to learn from the steps that you took. Some people are going to glean from you and learn to do what it is that you've already done that allowed you to step into the promise. Verse 10. The priests carrying the ark continued standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything was completed that the Lord had commanded Joshua to tell the people. In keeping with all that Moses had commanded Joshua, the people hurried across. So verse 10, what the Lord said to me was that he's bringing things back around. And this can pertain to words, promises, or instructions. The Lord is saying that he is bringing things back around. I know for me, lately, the Lord has been bringing back a lot of words that I received from him in 2021. And the Lord has also been bringing back around instructions that he gave me last year and several years ago. So the Lord is saying that before you enter into your promise, before you enter your Jericho, he's going to bring some things back up to you that he spoke to you before, that he instructed you to do before, or that he promised you before. Verse 11. And after everyone had finished crossing, the priests with the ark of the Lord crossed in the sight of the people. So verse 11, what the Lord brought me to, what he brought to my spirit was in Exodus when Moses asked the Lord, if your presence does not go with us, don't send us. And that's in Exodus 33, verse 15. So verse 11, what the Lord is saying is that his presence remains with you and that he is going with you. Verse 12, the Reubenites, Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh went in battle formation in front of the Israelites as Moses had instructed them. Verse 13, about 40,000 equipped for war crossed to the plains of Jericho in the Lord's presence. And what the Lord said to me about verse 12 and 13 was he spoke helpers. Those who have helped those you have helped in previous seasons are going to help you. They are ready to fight for you. So in verse 12, where it says the Reubenites, Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, they had already received their promise at this point in Joshua chapter 4, and they entered into their promised land, but they also had to help the other tribes to fight or do whatever it was needed for them to enter into their promise. So that's why the Lord is saying that there are people that you have helped in previous seasons to enter into their promise, and now that they've been set up and they've been in their promised land, they're now ready to help you. They're ready to fight for you. They're ready to do whatever it takes to help you enter into your land of promise. Verse 14. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they revered him throughout his life as they had revered Moses. The Lord told Joshua, command the priests who carried the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. So the Lord is saying that before you enter into your land of promise, this is for the leaders, as I said in my Jordan crossing video. This part is for the leaders. The Lord is going to exalt you in front of people, and they will know that the Lord is with you. And that's going to happen before you enter in. And then verse 16, what jumped out to me in that verse was it said the ark of the testimony. In everywhere else it says the ark of the Lord. But what the Lord spoke to me about that is that he said testimonies arise. After everyone crossed and Joshua was exalted, they were all left with the testimony of what God had done. The previous generation of Israelites had received a testimony when they crossed the Red Sea and saw their enemies wiped out. But this new generation only knew of miracle manna. That was the only miracle that they had seen God perform, was to receive manna from heaven every single morning. But God gave that new generation their own miraculous testimony, similar to the one of the previous generation when they crossed the Red Sea. So this new generation received their own miraculous testimony of crossing over and coming out. not one that they merely heard stories about. Verse 17. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up from the Jordan. When the priests carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant came up from the middle of the Jordan and their feet stepped out on solid ground, the water of the Jordan resumed its course, flowing over all the banks as before. That was verse 17 and 18. What the Lord spoke to me on that was, it's time to rise. You're going to be stepping on firm ground, rock solid, says the Lord. God is restoring the flow and putting everything back as it should be. Verse 19. The people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern limits of Jericho. Then Joshua set up in Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken from the Jordan, and he said to the Israelites, in the future, when your children ask their fathers, what is the meaning of these stones? Verse 22, you should tell your children, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. 23, for the Lord your God dried up the water of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, just as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over. Verse 24, this is so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord's hand is strong, and so that you may always fear the Lord your God. They camped at Gilgal and put stones there to build an altar. The stones represented each tribe of God's people. So what the Lord pointed out was that we are his altars. As the stones built the altar and the stones were a representation of God's people, God is saying that we are his altars. And an altar is a place of consecration and sacrifice. It's also an encounter with God's presence. And it also was a place for gifts. So in God saying that as God's people, we are his altars, we are to be a place of consecration and sacrifice to the Lord as his altars. As an altar being an encounter of his presence, as his altars, God's people, we should represent God. We should, when people encounter us, we should be a representation of the Lord so that they encounter him through us. So now I'm going to move on to chapter 5 and start at verse 1. When all the Amorite kings across the Jordan to the west and all the Canaanite kings near the sea heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, they lost heart and their courage failed because of the Israelites. What the Lord told me on that verse is that people are going to see you coming before you even get there. There are people who have heard about you. There are people who others have told about you. Whatever the case, there are going to be people who know about you before you enter the room, before they hear your voice, before they lay eyes on you. They already know about you. They already know that you're coming. Verse 2. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelite men again. Verse 3, so Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelite men at Gibeath Haraloth, I think is, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I'm probably not. Verse 4, this is the season Joshua circumcised them. This is the reason, Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt who were males, all the men of war, had died in the wilderness along the way after they had come out of Egypt. Verse 5, though all the people who came out were circumcised, none of the people born in the wilderness along the way were circumcised after they had come out of Egypt. 6, for the Israelites wandered in the wilderness 40 years until all the nation's men of war who came out of Egypt had died off because they did not obey the Lord. So the Lord vowed never to let them see the land he had sworn to their ancestors to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. He raised up their sons in their place. It was these Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised since they had not been circumcised along the way. So what the Lord spoke to me about verses 2-7, sorry, stuff going all over the place. So what the Lord spoke to me about those verses, he said, your seed will be consecrated and found pure before the Lord. Your seed will serve him. This can be your children or whatever you have produced from a business, from your ministry, something that you've created. Whatever your seed is, it will be found pure and consecrated before the Lord. When they were circumcised, that was a form of consecration in agreement with the covenant that God made with Moses. So the Lord is saying that whatever you produce, whatever your seed is, whether it's your natural seed, your children, or what you produced from seed, that will be found consecrated. That will be found pure and consecrated before the Lord. Verse 8. After the entire nation had been circumcised, they stayed where they were in the camp until they recovered. Verse 9. The Lord then said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the disgrace of Egypt from you. Therefore, that place is still called Gilgal today. So verses 8 and 9, what the Lord gave to me is that he will bring healing and restoration before you enter into the promise. In these verses, after they were circumcised, they had to rest until they were healed. They had to take the time to rest from their procedure, their circumcision. So the Lord said, what the Lord put on my spirit is that before you enter into your land of promise, he will bring you restoration and healing. Verse 10, while the Israelites camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, they observed the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month. I heard the Lord say Passover before crossover. You will celebrate. Give the Lord thanks. Praise him now before it even happens. Celebrate now for what the Lord is bringing you into before you even receive it. Verse 11, the day after Passover, they ate unleavened bread and roasted grain from the produce of the land. Verse 12, and the day after they ate from the produce of the land, the manna ceased. Since there was no more manna for the Israelites, they ate from the crops of the land of Canaan that year. He will no longer provide for you in the same way. They went from receiving manna from heaven to as their provision daily to eating from the land of Canaan, eating what was produced from the land. So God is saying that his provision will come from what is produced in your new territory. And I also heard the Lord say, you will lack no more. Verse 13. When Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua approached him and asked, are you for us or for our enemies? 14, neither, he replied. I have now come as commander of the Lord's army. Then Joshua bowed with his face to the ground in homage and asked him, what does my Lord want to say to his servant? Verse 15, the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did that. He said, you will have angelic encounters before you enter into your land of promise. Before you enter into Jericho, you will have angelic encounters. Your new territory is protected and has been deemed holy. So in the spirit realm, there are territorial spirits assigned to certain areas. And in this part of the Bible, in these verses, the commander of the Lord's angel army, he said, I'm not here for you guys, and I'm not here for the enemy. That's because the angel came to he was there for the land. The Lord of hosts sent his angel army to fight the battle against these territorial spirits that would have come against you at the entrance of your promise. Your territory has been cleaned out of all enemies and is now holy. The angel wasn't there for the people or for the enemy. He was there to cleanse and protect the territory. So that's the word that the Lord gave me. I pray that you all receive this, those who this word is for. Take this word back to the Lord and ask him how this is going to look before you enter into your land of promise, what each of these verses looks like for you. So until next time, guys, I love you all. Stay blessed. Bye.